and I'll just do the quick intro right now. Hello and welcome back to the Comic Books Matter podcast. I'm your host, Jesse, and with us today is the man with the best Dan DiDio impersonation, an endless source of information, and the host of Warm Balloon, John Siuntres.
Jesse, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much for being on such a small show at the moment. I'm really happy and excited that you're like my third guest on here because I've been listening to Word Balloon for years now. And honestly, it's half of what you, like most things that you do with Word Balloon inspired the show mixed in with another podcast. I'm like, I just want to talk to people about comics because it's so much fun.
Dude, that's why I started doing it. What's the other podcast? I'm always interested in hearing what other podcasts people listen to.
Let me look up the name of it. It just ended, which kind of bummed me out. But it's a book podcast, and basically he brought in authors and talked to them about the books that kind of changed their lives. I'm looking on my phone right now for it, so give me 1 second.
No problem. I'll as you're looking it up, I'll say that my intent was with Word Balloon, because I do love comics and have for so long. Treat them with the same respect that novelists and filmmakers and TV people get, because we know how sophisticated the stories have gotten, and they were due recognition and promotion more than what they normally get. God, how many articles, I'm sure you're the same way, have you read that start zip, bam, pow, guess what? Comic books aren't for kids anymore. And we're just like, it's like, yeah, thanks. We knew that in 1985, but by all means, go on. So, you get tired of that kind of coverage. And I wanted to provide a forum where, writers and artists can talk about what they do. And their storytelling is just as vital as, the other mediums I mentioned.
Yeah, of course. And like, that's the biggest thing is what I love about listening to your show overall is that hearing the ways that, like the best example of this is the stuff with Matt Fraction. It's how he looks at comics as not for kids in a lot of ways, and that's how he comes up with his ideas. And one of the best books right now is Jimmy Olsen, and literally a kid could read that right now.
I hear you,
but it's so much better if you're an adult.
Right, and I mean Matt always like looks at the pacing of comic book storytelling and the design, and decides, oh, maybe I can do something with this. And I know. He probably got inspired by all those Silver Age books that would have 2 or 3 stories per issue back then. And, he looked at that format and it was, just made his mind explode. And, we can do this in a bunch of different ways. And he certainly got the right artist in Steve Lieber, who really is carrying the heavy, lifting in that combination. But no, it's fantastic. And again, Jimmy lends himself to that kind of storytelling. They were always crazy, bizarre stories. I mean, that's Mort Weisinger, the guy who edited the Superman books. People look at him now and they're like, oh, aren't these covers goofy, or aren't these premises goofy? And actually, Mort Weisinger knew he was making a comic book or editing comic books that were appropriate for the times. And he was just reflecting what was happening in pop culture. So as ridiculous as it seemed to have Jimmy Olsen be a caveman beetle, he was responding to the Beetle craze and just throwing a little, sci-fi kind of spin on it. This was the days of, 1 million BC, Raquel Welch and the caveman fur bikini that she became so famous for, or having Pat Boone in a Superman comic book, the old 50s teenage singer, or there was a big reality show on in 50s and 60s television, Candid Camera, and the host was Alan Funt. And at one point, he would surprise people. And almost like Punk'd. It really actually, Candid Camera was really kind of the Punk'd of its day. And, I remember that cover was Superman changing from Clark Kent to Superman in the phone booth, and Alan Funt showing up with a camera. Smile, you're on Candid Camera. And so, that's what he was doing. And again, looking back now without those, what were modern touchstones of the time, people look at that stuff and like, what the hell's going on? Why is Superman so weird? But that's what he was doing.
And before I forget, the other podcast was But That's Another Story.
Okay.
Will Shelby. But speaking of Candid Camera, it's really funny because it was either This American Life or a Radio Lab episode where they talked about that show, and
Sure.
how it started as a radio show.
That's right.
And
Candid microphone. Yes.
yeah, to me, it's so wild that that was a concept that nowadays everybody would just believe it was faked.
Sure.
Even
You're
Candid
right.
Camera, that people would believe it was faked now. But like to think that people are like, oh yeah, hidden microphone, totally illegal, totally fine.
No, you're right. And truly, I forget the name of the cable channel that runs the television version of Candid Camera. It's a cable company that is directed towards Jewish lifestyle, and Alan Fung was a Jewish man. But if you watch, honestly, it's great because they act these things out, and I mean, you could tell these people really had no idea they were on camera, and they would be the craziest things. Like they had a car split in two, and like in the road, and like take two different directions, for, left and right at the same time, and just the people's looks on their faces and stuff. And that's a mild comparison. I mean, just crazy stuff. It was a great show.
Yeah, growing up, honestly, spending so much time with my grandparents and even in the house, my house in general, because my parents are a bit older, but in general, we just watch reruns of that stuff all the time. Like,
that's great.
I have so many friends who don't know like old black and white TV, and I'm like, what are you doing with your life? How do you not remember some of this stuff?
This is sad. I've been teaching audio production at a college here in Chicago, and I had them before the pandemic hit, make a Seinfeld radio commercial. And one kid came to me and said, 19 years old, and he's like, so the Seinfeld show, was it a sketch comedy show? And I'm like, no, it was a sitcom. He's like, well, I've never seen it. And I had 12 kids in the class, and I'm like, how many of you are aware of what Seinfeld was? 5 hands. How many of you actually watched the show? 1 hand. And I'm like, my God, I go, you guys are lucky I didn't make you cut up I Love Lucy. Then you really would have been in trouble.
What's funny is like my TV knowledge. We're way off topic, but this is what I love about word balloon in general. So I want to keep on going down this thread.
Tangents are welcome. Absolutely, man.
My TV knowledge is like all from like the 50s, close to the 80s, and then the 90s and early 2000s are just a no man's land. Because it's just the way I was raised and the stuff that I was allowed to watch or wasn't allowed to watch. And I grew up in the 90s and then early 2000s. And then after I was allowed to basically watch whatever I wanted, all that is now filled in. So I'm going through right now. It's funny you were talking, I can't remember which episode it was on, but you were talking about Deep Space Nine. And that's literally the first Star Trek show I've started from the beginning, and I'm watching all the way through right now.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, man.
I just had a friend who's a huge Star Trek fan, and she came up to me and she looked at me. She's like, Deep Space Nine, that's the one you should watch. I'm like, okay, that's all I'm watching then.
Well, yeah, it's the best. I think it's the best one of the spinoffs. And I love I love them all. As I always say, I mean, they could have a TV show called Star Trek Klingon Latrine Cleaning. And I'd be like, what night is it on? I'll be there. And I blew off like quality shows from the 2000s, like West Wing, because it was on opposite Voyager and Enterprise. And I'm like, I can't miss Star Trek. You don't understand.
Yeah.
I've been watching Star Trek for 50 years. But I think Deep Space Nine, especially now, really can resonate because it's about religion. It's about terrorism. And depending on your side of the political coin, you could say that, the Bajorans were either freedom fighters or they were terrorists. The Cardassians certainly regarded them as terrorists. And it asks some really big questions. And there's a lot of conflict on Deep Space Nine. And that kind of flew in the face of Roddenberry's feeling that, no, by, the 23rd century, Earth got its crap together and everything. I don't know if I could swear on this podcast.
You could feel free to, whatever feels
all
like.
Right, fine. So, yeah, he's like, we should have our shit together by the 23rd century. And, no more war between countries, and we're all one people and stuff. And I get it. And then certainly for the 60s, that was a wonderful idea to put out there. But, story comes from conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And Deep Space Nine had it. And I know there were a lot of purists that are like, oh, this isn't what I like. And even Majel Roddenberry, Roddenberry's widow, was like, I don't think Gene would like what you guys are doing with the show right now. All I can say is I think the show endures. They really went into connected storytelling. There wasn't binge watching, obviously, back then, but certainly as the seasons progressed and they really had big storylines for the entire seasons, it's a very bingeable show, and I think it ages the best of all of the spinoffs right now.
Yeah, I mean, we just I've been watching it in the afternoon. After my parents found out I started watching it, they love Star Trek too, And I remember it being on all the time when I was a kid, but I don't remember any of it. So when they found out I started watching it, my mom's like, well, now you're going to watch it with us then. Every night during dinner, we watch an episode at least. And we just hit that 2-parter where the changelings and maybe invaded Earth. And that whole 2-parter is 100% coronavirus right now.
Right.
Like the way they act, the way everybody's acting, the way
Sure.
the politics are in that episode, my parents were just making correlations with it. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's it.
Absolutely, man. And fake news I mean, just the idea of a military coup within the Federation and stuff. It's fascinating. And again, yeah, I mean, you're right. We are kind of under not martial law per se, but certainly there is this strong advisory of staying in and from this health problem. What state are you in, Jesse? Other than
I'm in California.
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
I mean, there you go, man. And I'm in Illinois, so I mean,
yeah.
And again, I think luckily I think we're in a couple states where I personally, and we don't have to get into politics, but I agree with my governor, and I agree with what Gavin Newsom was doing. I don't know what part of California you're in.
Yeah, I'm more on the red side, but myself, yeah, I agree with a lot of the stuff that's going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, I mean, I get it. Everyone's really frustrated and antsy and want to get back to normal as quickly as possible. But if you don't know how many people have it, how can you make those decisions? I mean, you have to, the testing has to happen. And forgive me, my last political comment is, can you imagine if the president during World War II were just like, yeah, we know it's a really big crisis, but this is really a state-by-state decision. Good luck with the Germans and the Japanese. So we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, no, of course.
That just seems to be the attitude. Whereas Roosevelt, the president has this power to demand that industries stop whatever they're making and focus on today's problem. And back then it was auto industry. You're not going to make cars for the next couple of years. You're making planes, you're making tanks, you're making Jeeps because we need them. Mm-hmm. And all the big auto companies are like, we got to do it. We have no choice. It has to be done. And again, I don't understand this kind of like that these demands aren't being made. And I think the companies would be willing to do them. Just give them that direction, or just even the idea of whatever supplies there are. Okay, who needs this stuff the most?
Yeah.
They get the first wave. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And like having older parents, it's like one of those things where I'm like, I don't want them going out, but I can't tell them they stay inside.
Sure.
So it's
I
like,
get that too.
If I can protect them as much as I can, because I'm technically an essential worker, so I still go to work 5 days a week and I commute and everything.
Wow.
But there's only 10 of us in my office, so like we're not near each other, we're not doing anything. So I'm trying to be as safe as possible myself. So like I think it's important.
I understand, man. I was working in radio, and unfortunately they had cutbacks for the job that I was doing, and I got let go. But prior to that, for the first several weeks, we had skeleton crews, and we kept our distance, and we were wiping down our studios and microphones anyway, just from normal germs, let alone this pandemic. So we were already in those practices, and and then finally the last couple of weeks we were working from home remotely. But if they had told me I had to come in, I was ready to do it because, I working at a news station, it's like, hey, news reporters go into burning buildings to cover the story sometimes. That's part of the job.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it again near the end, but I'll just say right now, if you can support John's podcast on Patreon, like I'm currently supporting it as a comic book reader at $3 because that's the price of a comic book, and these episodes are worth way more than that. But like, if you can support John, because like everything he does is really quality. Like every interview is fun. And
that's very kind, Jesse. I appreciate that, man. And I'm trying to put out a fun conversation show that even during this, we still talk about what interests us and what creative people are thinking about as they make this stuff. What inspires them to make the books that they make.
Yeah, and like before, I was kind of picky with which episode I listened to because I was like, I don't know this name. Why would I listen? But at this point, I listen to every episode because even if I don't know the name, I learned about someone new. And honestly, by the time I finish, I start reading those books. Like
that means a lot, man. I always, when people tweet that to me, I'm smiling right now. I always will quote the tweet and I'll say the system works because luckily, anecdotally, many writers and artists will tell me that they'll meet new readers at conventions who say, I never would have known about your book had you not been on Word Balloon. So that's the best compliment I can get. Thank you.
And not only does John's podcast influence comic book reading, it influences TV watching because I have started Columbo and Bosch now because of John.
Oh, good. Two good shows, man. I know my buddy Julianne Julianne Emery is the co-star for season 6, and it's a great show. I mean, Titus Welliver, the lead that plays Bosch, he's a great, compelling actor.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter Falk, I mean, my God, that guy, movies and TV, was always such an idiosyncratic actor and character. And I mean, really, to me, Columbo is a classic Agatha Christie drawing room murder, where instead of a very posh Hercule Poirot or Miss Marple, this like stumbling, almost like clownish guy walks in, and none of the murderers take him seriously. And they're like, this buffoon is investigating? I'm going to get away with this scot-free. And they have no idea the intellect that is there. And he peels the onion layer by layer. Let me ask you something. I don't know. I might be nuts. But it is that great deceptive demeanor that he shows. And even the 90s episodes that were made, 15 years after the show went off the air, a lot of Columbo diehards are like, yeah, whatever. And I'm like, hey, much like I said about Star Trek, Peter Falk could show up and just be like, I'm eating chili for the next 90 minutes. You had me at hello. Sit down and eat the chili. I'll be watching.
He has a movie on Criterion that I've been meaning to get around to watching. It's like I think like a mob movie with like him and like it's his character and has a brother, and his brother gets into trouble, so he has to help him with that. And I can't remember what it's called. But
it's not okay. It's not The In-Laws.
I don't think it's The In-Laws. It's like two. Okay. It's the two main characters' names is in the title. I just can't remember what it's called.
Oh, I wonder which one that is. I love them. I love Peter Falk though. His entire movie career, he was incredible.
Yeah, and then like with Bosch, it's so engrossing because my dad's like, "Hey, I started watching this." I'm like, "Oh, I've been meaning to watch it." So we watched the first episode again because he already watched it, and we binged the whole first season like in 4 days. Just like every night we just watched 2. It's like whatever, I'll stay up late. Let's just watch it. I want to get going.
It's an embarrassment of riches. I mean, we really are, for the last 20 years or so years, have been in the midst of a new golden age of television, and television is eating movies lunch when it comes to complex storytelling, because they have the broader canvas and they can tell one story over 10 or 13 episodes. And it's great. And I mean, it's only gotten better. And I think it pushes the networks to be more creative in a way that they never had. And that's why we got inventive shows like The Good Place on NBC. Mm-hmm. And that blew my mind that it was able to survive and thrive and last as long as it did. Because, again, I think they know the pressure, and I think they were willing to listen to the creators who said, hey, we only want to do a certain amount of episodes each season. And it was always worth the wait. And again, streaming and cable are able to do it no problem. But that network model of 20 or 23 or 4 shows a season, that's a hard habit to break, because there's a lot of built-in costs that used to be offset by syndication. Mm-hmm. And now that just doesn't happen anymore. So they're having to find different ways. I mean, now there's the revenue stream of DVDs and, buying shows online and stuff. But I think the network model had to change because of the nimbleness of basic cable and the streamers.
Yeah, and though we're drowning in subscription models now, I am very excited for HBO Max because I want those TMC movies or TCM.
Me too, man. Oh, me too. Good Lord. I have Xfinity Comcast, and they moved Turner Classic Movies to a sports package, and it was like you have to spend an extra $10 to get Turner, and I felt like I was already paying through the nose for cable as it was. And so for like about 7 or 8 months, I'm like, I am not spending an extra $10 for these old movies. And finally, I think during the virus at the beginning of April, I bit the bullet, and I'm like, I miss these movies too much, man. I got to watch them, because not only the films, but all the documentaries they do. Turner Classic Cinema, or Turner Classic Movies, is such a great channel and a great education. And it's really, I think, if you're a creative person, it's really good to watch the old stuff and be open to it. And that's cool that you are, because, there's been over 100 years of great movie making. Mm-hmm. And you may as well learn from the people who did it best, because that's like Tarantino's your classic example of a great modern day sponge who can look at old stuff and see the tricks and the storytelling methods that they use and spin it into a modern product. And I really think that's good, because that's essentially what had been happening for years prior to cable. And I mean, you know, I grew up in that 5-channel world, as I'm sure your parents did as well,
Yeah.
where we didn't, you know, cable didn't really come into my life until my late high school and college years. So I grew up watching these old black and white TV shows and films, and it was just another programming option. And again, tell me that, you know, classic Hitchcock isn't better than 90% of the stuff that gets out there these days.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. So no, you know, don't ignore these masters just because it's black and white. But I also can appreciate young people that they're just. I think this generation of children, really for the last 20 years or so, maybe even 25 years or 30 years, they have been so catered to in terms of having their own media sphere that literally from Teletubbies to now, like they are being programmed to 24/7. When I was a little kid, it was Saturday mornings and a little bit of after school television, but also that after school television was mixed with a bunch of old stuff. And now you really can, you know, grow up on Nickelodeon and never watch, you know, a rerun. Why would you, when there are all these like shows that are aimed at tweeners and kids younger than 12 or 11, and Disney XD and all these channels, and they're giving you 24/7 of programming that is catered to you. So Howard Chaykin and I were talking about this on a recent episode, and I don't say that to defend what's happening. I'm just trying to explain it, and Howard knows it too. Howard's a creature of television. He's certainly written enough television in his career, but yeah, it is. I do think that's the problem, and again, that it doesn't surprise me. Because by the same token, just like you were saying about some modern shows, I mean, I don't know my Disney live action TV shows. I don't know any of that stuff. I knew a little bit of it when my nephews were young, and The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody was a favorite of theirs, or Josh and Drake, I want to say. Wasn't that another Disney live action show?
That was Nickelodeon, but yeah.
Oh, it was Nickelodeon. There you go.
Still, yeah. But even then, like I'm closer to it than you are at this point. I have a nephew too who's about in TV watching age, around 10, and like I still don't know anything. I know the cartoons because I still love cartoons, but any of the live action is just over my head. And that's what's really fascinating. And I hope, at least I see it with people around my age, but I hope too with my nephew and the kids growing up now that they come to appreciate a lot of the older stuff, because especially as you're creative, as you said, because like as on the side I write, and like I learn from everything that I consume media wise.
Totally. Well, and again, it's up to you to educate them. And luckily, I mean, you know, my father was great. My father was never going to be a creative person. He was a part-time musician. He could play the piano well, but he would really get excited again in that 5-channel world where it was like, hey, they're showing 12 Angry Men at 1:00 in the morning Friday night. Will you stay up and watch it with me? And my dad was one of my best friends, so I'm like, sure, Dad, that'd be great. And you know, or he wasn't in World War II, but he was drafted in the final months of World War II and ended up serving during the post-war occupation. And he served in Vienna, in Germany, when, you know, Germany was beaten and they had the 4 Allied countries policing Germany as it was, you know, building itself back up again, but under very heavy Allied rules. So the military police were really in charge of all the major cities. And he said, you want to see what it was like for me in the Army? I said, sure. And we watched this great Orson Welles, Joseph Cotten movie called The Third Man. And it's one of the classics of the post-war period.
That's on my list to watch for sure.
Oh, it's so good.
I hear about it all the time.
Great Criterion film. You know, I'm sure if it's not on the channel, you could definitely get the DVD. I'd be shocked if it wasn't on the channel. But it is. It's such an amazing film. And yeah, I mean, that's how it was explained to me. It was, yeah, you want to see what I did during the war? I was an MP. And I had to, and it's all about the black market in the post-war era, and crooks exploiting people, and like, you know, they think they're getting medicine when really it's placebos, it's fake medicine and stuff, and people dying. It's a great suspense and mystery story, and yeah. So I mean, again, this is, you know, I'm glad I had a father and uncles and aunts and everything beyond my parents that really were like, oh, you've got to see Spencer Tracy. He's incredible. And now I've watched Spencer Tracy movies, and yes, he is incredible. Jimmy Stewart was incredible. Jimmy Stewart, the Tom Hanks of from the 30s through the 60s. that everyman that everybody loves and everything. I mean, I would say that Tom Hanks is the Jimmy Stewart of his era.
Mm-hmm.
So, you find out about these great actors and actresses and stuff, and you appreciate their work, and same with the writers and the directors.
Yeah, I mean, I have the same appreciation with my father. Like, and it's funny because like not every movie that he wants to watch with me, I enjoy fully. Like this might be sacrilege, but like I honestly did not very much care for Ben-Hur, but I think it's mostly because it was so long. But we just popped on recently, Jason and the Argonauts, and I enjoyed watching that with him. We just sat there and watched it.
That's awesome, man.
I popped it on for myself, and he just sat down and watched it with me.
It's a fun stop motion, and there's a technology stop motion animation that probably looks quaint to a modern kid, but Ray Harryhausen, man, that was magic back, when he started doing that stuff in the 50s. And one of my first San Diego Comic-Cons, 2006, I got to meet Ray Bradbury and Ray Harryhausen. They were walking around together just because they grew up as nerds. They were there at San Diego since it started in the 70s, and they were geniuses, and I mean such science fiction icons. But it was great to walk up and thank them for their work, and they were incredibly kind and gracious, and I'm sure they shook a million hands over the years of fans like us that just appreciate what they did.
Yeah, my goal once this is all over and things kind of calm down is to try to make an effort to go to more cons, because I haven't been able to go to much cons even before this. But I just realized like I don't have enough time to wait to see my favorite creators, especially the older ones. Like I just need to make my way there somehow.
I hear you, man. No, it's San Diego is terrific, and San Diego, New York in particular, the old timers show up, and I'm glad. And really, yeah, it's a good chance to thank them for the beautiful stuff they've done, especially the comic book people. I mean, Jim Aparo was this wonderful artist from the 60s through the 90s and was one of the top Batman artists. Mm-hmm. Never went to a San Diego convention until very late in his career in the 90s. And he got a standing ovation, and he started to cry. And he's like, I didn't know. Because a lot of these guys, especially from the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and the Bronze Age, ending in the mid-'80s and stuff, some of them just never got into the fan thing, and they literally were sitting at their drafting table or behind their typewriter and stuff and just hammering the stuff out. I mean, making great art that we still appreciate decades later, but they were earning a paycheck. They didn't know. They really didn't know the impact that they had on so many of us.
Yeah. And I guess that's a good transition to talk about like what comic book character, story, or whatever like really impacted you growing up.
Sure. Well, from a visual standpoint, I always loved The Flash, and not only and when I was growing up, Barry Allen was The Flash, and I loved Kid Flash because he had a great costume too. But I really loved Jay Garrick, the Golden Age Flash's costume with the Mercury helmet and the wing shoes. I don't know, something about all those Golden Age characters, the Justice Society, those designs of those costumes, which is so beautiful. And really from Dr. Midnight to Hourman, I was a huge Hourman fan. Didn't care about his powers. Just really, it was all visual, especially early on.
Or even like the Sandman. From
absolutely, with the gas mask and the green suit and the gun. Oh, God, yeah. And, man, again, the look of these characters was enough to appreciate. And also, when I was growing up in the 70s, they were reprinting a lot of the Golden Age and Silver Age stuff in dollar books, 50-cent books, and you'd get a couple old stories along with the news story and everything. So it was just comics. It didn't matter. But then as I got older, and especially by college age, a lot of writers, the writing started to get more sophisticated in the mid-'80s. And God, in the 90s when they were doing Sandman Mystery Theater, which I don't know if you've ever read those, but, oh, they're so good. It's the writers, Matt Wagner and Steve Siegel, took the original Sandman stories that were only like 10 pages long and turned them into 5-issue story arcs. And it was amazing and also kept them still in the late 30s. So it was the beginnings of the DC universe when there were only a handful of mystery men, as they called them back then, as opposed to superheroes. And they were really sophisticated stories. Guy Davis, a brilliant artist, would draw them. And it really was great. It was this street-level hero that didn't have powers. He had his gas gun and he had his gas mask, but really was just kind of a guy that had to rely on his fists. Wasn't Batman, wasn't a physical specimen, but, really was able to he had, he kind of operated along the lines of the Shadow, and a bit like Batman in terms of working from the darkness of an alley or things like that, and the element of surprise. But they were just really smart stories. So that's been the fun, is what I appreciated from a visual standpoint as a kid. The writing just kept getting better and better, and that's what excited me. So, I mean, honestly, everything from, I was in college. I hadn't read comics in a while because there were periods, and I don't know if this happened in your life, but, I loved comic books. And then when I was starting to get to high school age, I wanted to date girls. So it was, all right, do you have money for a date or do you have money for comic books? Well, I'd put the money into trying to date girls.
Mm-hmm.
So I stopped reading for a while. And then in the mid-'80s, there was a Rolling Stone magazine article, the great rock and roll magazine, talking about Frank Miller's run on The Dark Knight Returns. And how, isn't this interesting? Frank Miller is doing this kind of outlaw Batman that's turning 60 and had been retired for 10 years, and all of a sudden is coming back. And I'm like, well, that sounds interesting. So I went to the local comic shop. I went to Illinois State University, went to a local comic shop, got the first issue of Dark Knight Returns. And at the time, they also, or close enough to that time, they started having ads for Watchmen.
Mm-hmm.
And if, it depends on who you talk to, because I know younger people will read Watchmen and go, what's the big deal? The big deal, because there have been so many stories that have emulated Watchmen's beats. I mean, even Mark Miller's great series, Jupiter's Legacy and Jupiter's Circle, borrows a lot, I think, from Watchmen and the generations of heroes and all that idea. But Watchmen did it first, and it was so exciting to see. And Dave Gibbons was already a top artist, and Alan Moore was already a top writer. But they just took the idea of the superhero story in such a radical direction, and it was really groundbreaking, exciting stuff. And we were all blown away. So it's, again, it started with the visuals for me, but then thankfully the writing got more sophisticated, and that's what's brought me back to comics and maybe an adult reader.
And the funny thing is, I feel like a lot of people in that era of comic books, it was the Dark Knight Returns and Batman, the 1989 movie, that brought so many people back. Because I remember hearing Kevin Smith say the same thing. Like, those are the two things that brought him back.
Oh, yeah.
Were the Dark Knight Returns and then that movie. Because, like, it reinvigorated, like, what comics could be for an adult.
Yeah.
And even my dad talks about it, like, when it first came out and stuff.
Oh, so. That when they would run that Batman trailer the summer before it or the winter before it came out. It might have been the year before. I don't know. But comic shops would have VHS copies of the trailer, and they just run them over and over and over again. And we'd all just stand transfixed and watched it, because what Tim Burton was able to do visually was really, really exciting. And, God, I mean, Jack Nicholson was a perfect guy for Joker.
Mm-hmm.
It was an event. All of a sudden, people took it seriously. I mean, the original Richard Donner Superman movie is a great movie, but it still had a little bit of that Batman 66 campiness to it. And by the way, I do love Batman 66. The original.
Yeah, I have the Blu-ray box set of that.
Oh, that's great, man.
The whole series.
That's great. Well, I always say there's like 3 stages of watching Batman, the 66 show. And the first is when you're 5 years old, that's like the greatest action show ever.
Yeah.
The fights are incredible. And you don't know it's a comedy, and you're buying into it all. Then you hit about 10 or 11 and it's a joke, and it's like, oh, this is corny. Then you hit high school age and you see it again, and all of a sudden it registers with you. Oh no, it's corny on purpose. It's a parody. It really is a very smart, snide show that is making fun of the comic book tropes. And then you realize that Adam West is this incredible comedy genius. And now growing up with Family Guy and all the other great things that Adam West did before he passed away, we all recognize what a tremendous actor he was. But also, really, at the end of the day, this guy playing a straight man, but really playing it in such an audacious way that he himself is incredibly funny. And just deadpan Robin, we have to be careful. And it's just, you buy it. And it's like, oh my, and like I said, first he's like, oh man, this guy's really sincere about fighting crime when you're 5. And then you in high school, it's just like, this guy's one of the funniest men ever to walk the earth. I mean, my God, he's a genius. He's a comedy genius. So I love that show. But like I said, Superman still had a little bit of that. And it really did take first the Burton movie, which was audacious in its design.
Hmm.
but at least it had a ground in most ways a reasonably grounded story. And then God, the Nolan movies, thank God, 20 years later, or 15 years later, are just incredible examples of great storytelling and really like putting Batman in a modern, air quotes, plausible situation. I don't know. I mean, as much as there have been real superheroes that have come in the last 20 years and are out patrolling and stuff like that, it's still a little goofy, but
Yeah.
I don't know, a little more believable with Nolan.
Well, and it's one of those amazing things, I think, when it comes to comics and comic book related things, but most media in general. You get two contexts. You get the context of when you first enjoyed it, but then you get the context of when it actually came out. Because I think about when you said with Watchmen, how a lot of people are like, my age are like, well, what's the big deal about Watchmen? Is they miss the context of when it came out in a lot of ways. And that really influences that book. But also the messaging now in the modern day of what Watchmen is, I think is way off than what it originally was. Because a lot of people, I feel like, treat Rorschach as like the hero of that book, where he really was just as bad as everybody else, and
Absolutely.
everybody in that book was a villain,
Or at least incredibly flawed
yeah,
and just damaged.
like the most,
Even like Night Owl, Dan Dryberg, with the best intentions, was a damaged guy.
yeah, he was the most heroic of them all, and even then he let the evil win that round.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's the world is complicated. I mean, that's the real message of Watchmen, and I really enjoyed the HBO series, and I give uh, Damon Lindelof so much credit for finding a way of playing in that universe, telling his own story, but really capturing the ideas of Watchmen. And I think it was very smart to, keep it within, 20 years of the original story and
Yeah,
really, keep, as opposed to just trying to modernize everything. Because as you say, yeah, it is an 80s story. It very much is an 80s story. And also a lot of what ifs, like, well, if a superhero were there and won the Vietnam War for us, who's to say that Richard Nixon wouldn't have had 4 terms? Maybe they would have changed that law.
yeah,
And also, again, based on the precedent of, Franklin Roosevelt being such an important president during the Depression and World War II, that he was able to be elected 4 times and stuff. So it wasn't as implausible then as it might be now.
yeah, and I really enjoyed the Lindelof show a lot. And my only gripe with it overall was I didn't feel like it took a hard stance on anything other than like 1 or 2 subjects that it was portraying. But I understand at the same time nowadays when you're making TV, yeah, you have to play the politics of what might be allowed. And back in comic books, like then at least when you have someone like Alan Moore at the height of Alan Moore's career at that point, you just let him do whatever except have the characters he asked for.
Yeah, and instead of getting the characters that he asked for, they end up creating this whole different group. I mean, I think it would have still been a very effective story
Yeah,
had DC, let him take Blue Beetle and the Question and all those characters and turn them that way. But then again, we wouldn't have these very unique choices, different characters, and still be able to get great Question stories and Blue Beetle stories and Nightshade and all the other quality heroes when
yeah,
they are put in the hands of the right creators. I mean, I think right now Jeff Lemire and Dennis Cowan are telling a great Question story, and the Question is different from Rorschach. Rorschach is a psychotic,
yeah,
and so that's good, because I do think there's a palpable difference between them. And again, it's when you are a lot of times in creativity, when you're told no, it makes your mind react, and sometimes you come up with a better solution had someone just said do whatever you want with whomever you want.
yeah, and I think I'm grateful for that decision because some of my favorite characters are Blue Beetle and the Question, and I don't think they would ever have become my favorite characters if they were in Watchmen. Like,
Sure.
yeah,
Well, it certainly built Blue Beetle much more, and it's interesting because he was a Ditko creation, a
yeah,
much more optimistic character than even Night Owl was. I mean, Night Owl's trying to be the Blue Beetle, essentially, but again, his own foibles keep him from that ability to do it. And again, that was the great thing about Watchmen, was everybody's flawed. And I would say to what you said about Lindelof and everything, every villain thinks they are the hero of their story, and that their motives are absolutely the right thing to do. And that's why, like, the portrayal of Lex Luthor in Smallville, I thought was excellent and tragic in the best ways, because Lex is just trying to be the best guy he knows how to be. And yeah, he breaks the rules and cuts corners and stuff like that. But for, a good 4 or 5 years, his intent is, no, I can be a good man. I can be better than my family and my family's reputation if people would just let me. And a lot of it was, things that pushed him to be darker were an entire community going, "Oh, you Luthers." Jonathan Kent all the time. I can't trust those Luthers.
Yeah.
And it just, and it hurt him. And it's good. And really got a great book that, oh God, no, I'm blanking. Elliot Magan, one of the great Bronze Age Superman writers. He wrote a book called Last Son of Krypton. And it was supposed to be a tie-in to the movies, but then they were told it couldn't be, so he had to write an original paperback story. And this is a paperback novel not meant for a comic book audience. It was meant for an older audience, but it was a Bronze Age sensibility Superman story where he was Superboy, grew up in Smallville, all the classic tropes. And he told this very adult portrayal of Luthor. And at one point, Superman, a powerless Superman, and Luthor are trapped somewhere, and Luthor saves Superman because it's the only way they're going to get out. And they just know each other so well that it's a great portion of the book that you forget that they were once friends. Or my favorite scene at the end of, if you've ever read Kingdom Come.
Oh yeah.
Well, that scene in Planet Krypton, the restaurant, and it's Clark and Bruce and Diana all having dinner or whatever. And, Clark asks Bruce, "Hey, how's Luthor?" And he goes, "Oh, I caught him down in the Batcave trying to hack the Bat computer." And he goes, "By the way, he says hello." And Clark has this great look at us. He's like, "Really?" And really "Oh, maybe he'll be friends again." And Bruce is like, "No." And I just love that, because that is those two characters right there, Bruce and Clark. Clark is like, "Oh, maybe I could be friends with him again." And Bruce is like, "You idiot. He hates you. It's not going to happen." And again, this is the subtext that these modern writers and artists are able to convey in today's stories. That is the great thing. I quote Bendis all the time, where we've seen a million fistfights between these characters, but what we haven't heard is every conversation. And knowing what we know now about these characters, another great example is, and it was, I believe, in when Brian was writing it, it was Dr. Doom and the Thing, because we know the Dr. Doom Reed Richards relationship, and that Doom was always outdone by Reed. But what I love is Ben Grimm and Victor Von Doom, because they went to college too, and Doom looks at Ben like, "You dumb jock, you're still that big man on campus idiot that I could outwit circles around." And by the same token, Ben Grimm is like, "You nerd, you're still that little twerp that thinks you're so great with your brain, and you have no idea how the world works." And that's, to me, the much more interesting. You can hear the smile in my voice, but it really, that's what excites me. It's like, yeah, man, that's what I want to see. I want to see the Thing in Victor Von Doom, because there's still those two college guys that hate each other and never understood where the other guy was coming from. And that, to me, is fantastic and a great dynamic to explore.
Yeah, I think one of the best things in the later years of the New 52 was when Luthor was like, "No, I'm going to be a hero, because if I can't beat Superman as a villain, well, I'm just going to be better than him as a hero." And that whole arc of when he was helping them during Forever Evil, I think, was the event, and then how he got the Superman logo on his suit, and and then crossing the Rebirth, when eventually Luthor went back to being bad, it became a point where he was like, "I can't even beat him at his own game. Like, where am I at now? Like, what am I going to do?"
Yeah, Jeff Johns, to me, my favorite spin, because it went like mad scientist originally, then around the John Byrne era, they turned him into the industrialist.
Yeah, that's what I've been reading recently, is the John Byrne stuff.
It's great. It's fantastic. But I loved that Jeff Johns made Lex Luthor a more selfish Steve Jobs, where I am going to be the savior of humanity, and I will get all the credit for it. And he's doing it as much for the glory as he is to. I do think Luthor was like coming up with these things to better the world, but he wanted the credit. I mean, that's why it's Luthor Corp, and Luthor's name is all over the place on everything he ever does. And all of a sudden, this alien shows up with nothing but goodness in his heart, and all the people love him, and that drives him crazy. And it really is an egotistical thing with him, and that to me, and also Brian Azzarello and Lee Bermejo did this great Lex Luthor miniseries called Man of Steel. And it was Lex Luthor, Man of Steel. And there's this great lunch that Lex has with Bruce Wayne, having no concept that he's talking to Batman. But he basically makes the xenophobic argument of, this guy is an alien. How can we trust him? When does he stop pretending and his real motives come to light? We can't let that happen. And there's a little bit of that in the Zack Snyder Batman v Superman movie. Not enough.
Yeah.
And I really think they missed a great opportunity where Jesse Eisenberg is playing Luthor like he is a Batman 66 villain, instead of being a sober Steve Jobs social network kind of in the way that he was in that movie and stuff. Just like very much like, hey, we can't trust this guy. We have no idea what his real motives are. And I think it would have been much more effective and an interesting intellectual problem rather than, wah, ha, ha, I'm going to get Superman. You know?
Yeah, and even with the end of I think of the end of All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison, like you have him get the Superman serum at the end, and he's like, "This is what you see. This is everything that you perceive the world to be." Then he loses it. He's like, "Why not? Like, give me more so I can do what you can't. I can save people." And he's like, "You had all this time, Luthor, to work with me, and you chose to fight me the whole time."
Yeah,
and
but
even with regret and with that,
absolutely. But then also that, after Superman dies, doesn't Luthor kind of become a Superman and a serum? I mean, that's
a better person at the end of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, and he doesn't realize it, but he becomes the thing that he used to hate. But he becomes Superman. I mean, that's terrific. No, it's a great story, man. I'll tell you, I've only had 2 on the record conversations with Grant Morrison. One was only 5 minutes on video, and the other was this past month when I only had 45 minutes, and he was sharing the time with Liam Sharp. And I love Liam too, and I didn't want to shortchange Liam. And we mostly talked about Green Lantern. I'm hoping to get Grant back at some point. It's tough because he doesn't do a ton of interviews. I'm glad he consented to do the one that we did. I think he had fun, and it was nice. And he seemed to. I hadn't seen him in like over 10 years, and we had a nice, friendly conversation. I really hope that I get a chance sooner than later to talk to him again.
Yeah, man talks 100 miles an hour every time I hear an interview. But every word is amazing.
You know, the Scottish in particular have such deep accents. And Mark Miller, I talked to him in December, and he speaks quickly as well, because again, I understand they are speaking English. It's just that those accents are so deep. And every now and then I would be like, okay, Mark, I think you just said XYZ. And he'd laugh. And he's like, John, I'm sorry. I got to remember to slow down when I'm speaking to Americans. And it's true. And he was telling me, he said it on the show, that there was a DC editor that never understood his accent. And no matter what he told him, he'd be like, ha, that's hilarious. And he was telling him, oh, my uncle just died last week. And he's like, that's hilarious. And it's not realizing what Mark had just told him. So no, they do understand. Most of the Scots, I'll use those 2 as an example. But it seems like if you explain to them, it's like, all right, just slow down just a hair, man, because I'm getting it. And that's always been like the great complaint of when I've had Mark on. It's like, I can't understand what he's saying. And I'm like, well, you have to listen carefully, and you'll get it. He'll come to you. So
after Watchmen and The Dark Knight, what was the next comic book you think that hit close to home with you?
Well, I really appreciated Kingdom Come, Alex Ross, and also Marvels. Marvels was Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek, and Kingdom Come was Mark Waid and Alex. Alex's art is so realistic and so beautiful that, again, that's what got me in the front door. But it was the stories that kept me there. I've always been a Nick Fury fan, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. I love the fact that Samuel L. played him in the movies, but I go back to the original design of Nick Fury as well, and so I've always appreciated. I grew up with the whole James Bond craze, so the secret agent genre has always hit me well. And so I've always been a fan of that. Crime comics are terrific. And I really got Slam Bradley, who was in the original Action Comics #1 and was another creation of Siegel and Schuster, a plainclothes detective guy. When Ed Brubaker and Darwin Cook were doing Catwoman in the early 2000s, Slam became a big character in that book. And I always appreciated him as kind of like a Humphrey, a bigger, beefier, kind of a cross between Robert Mitchum physically and maybe a Bogart sensibility as far as his attitude. But I always thought he was a great character. I love Wildcat because I'm a massive boxing fan. And the original Ted Grant and him being a former heavyweight champion that became a superhero. I thought that was a lot of fun. And the JSA book that James Robinson, David Goyer, and eventually Jeff Johns all wrote, and then Jeff really took till the end of the run, that to me was a superior comic book because it understood the legacy portion of the DC universe. The Golden Age heroes were teachers and really helping the next young generation of heroes learn the craft. And they were as important to the story as the new heroes were. And I appreciated that because, again, it was that combination of my favorite designs of costumes, but being more sophisticated. God, I loved when Shazam, Captain Marvel, I still call him Captain Marvel.
I do too half the time.
when Billy Batson was dating Stargirl. And she knew that he was Captain Marvel. And there were a couple moments where they might be hugging or something as Captain Marvel and Stargirl. And Jay Garrick getting in Shazam's face and going, hey, that's a teenage girl. You're an adult man. What the hell do you think you're doing? Yeah. And he couldn't reveal his identity, and he had to break up with her. And Billy had to break up with her and stuff. I'm like, wow, man, that sucks. That's too bad because Billy is a kid. You know, Captain Marvel really is a kid hiding in a man's body. And that's one of the things that make him fun. But that's the thing. They would take anyone who would take these original character designs and find more mature stories to tell about them that they wouldn't have told 30 years ago, 35 years ago.
Yeah, I think, honestly, the holy trinity of those kind of writers is Jeff Johns, Mark Waid, and Kurt Busiek. Like, all three of them, every character they touch has this sense of honoring the legacy of whoever it belongs to, but also at the same time fleshing out that world to a level that I could never have imagined myself.
Yeah, I mean, no, you're right. They understood what made the characters great, and they also share from the benefit of knowing that they're also playing with these characters to an older audience that grew up with them as well. I got to tell you, and I've been talking about it ever since Jeff let me see the first 5 episodes of Stargirl, the new CW show that's going to start in a week. It's amazing, and it is so worth everyone's time. And it's I really think, especially right now during the shut-in, everyone's going to really appreciate it because it's an upbeat show. It's a good family show. It's funny. It has its dark corners to it, but it works, and I think it works on a lot of levels. And I really appreciate how good it is.
I always, and I'm super excited for the Stargirl show myself because, like, every character that, because I like, one of my biggest dreams ever is to eventually write a comic book for one of the big two, but it's DC mostly, and all those characters that I really want to write are the old JSA Charlton type characters that don't get the limelight anymore because I feel like they still have a lot of stories to tell, but no one knows what to do with them just yet.
Agreed.
And I hope we get to a point where, like, now that the JSA are kind of back in the universe and we know Ted Kord is back as Blue Beetle, like, I want them to get their own comics again. But at the same time, I know that there's been iterations on these people. Like, we have Jaime Reyes as Blue Beetle. We have other people as The Flash. We have other people as just the other legacy characters. And I want them to still be incorporated into whatever comes out, because I think as much as legacy matters, relatability to newer audiences still matter. And yeah. I'm not one of those people that yells and complains whenever a character changes race or genders or anything like that. Because to me, when it comes to, like, I think Stan Lee maybe said this, it's like Spider-Man is just like, it's the mask, and then there's Peter Parker, but there's also Miles. Like, they're both Spider-Man, but they're different
Right.
people. And I think
Yeah.
as long as you keep that that kind of idea of it, I think that new characters can take the mantle at any time, and I think it would be fun.
I agree. And I would say that if your ambition is to write for the big two, follow in the footsteps of people like Kirkman and others that created their own characters that Invincible
Hmm.
clearly is Kirkman's initial take on Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And he created his own character, and doing that got him Marvel jobs and everything. And then of course, Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean that's the thing. It's interesting because I think and especially for young people, that is the initial ambition. God, it'd be great to write Superman. It'd be great to write Spider-Man, the Avengers, whatever.
Hmm.
But I was even every now and then someone will write me and say, hey, how do I break into the big two? And it's like, make your own stuff. Make your own stuff and make it matter, because that's how you will get noticed. But also, you might find that once you're there and writing for the big two, it may not be what you really want. Rick
Hmm.
Remender was just on the show talking about that.
Yeah, I love that
Was,
episode.
and Ricky's a smart guy, man. I love talking to him because, that was the ambition. And then he got there and it was, well, you can't use this villain because of X, and you can't use this hero because this writer is writing them, and whatever. And it's hard that,
Hmm.
but again, when you have restrictions, that's when creativity will really serve you and likely create a better story than you maybe initially had, in the case of the Watchmen as an example. But that said, I really think you need to, because I think you need to create your own characters. And the great thing is the problems they face are reasonably universal. So you could do an aging Batman and have a different street level hero kind of going through whatever you wanted Batman to go through. God, in fact, Joe Casey, one of the best writers who really made his splash in the 90s at the big two and in the early 2000s, then created Ben 10.
Hmm.
Ben 10 was supposed to be a Dial H for Hero DC idea that they rejected. And he's like, well, fuck you. I still, him and the other guys of his studio, the Men of Action, they knew they had something, and they pitched it independent of Dial H to Cartoon Network. And, it's like 15 years later, Ben 10, or 10 years later, I forget how long it's been running. But my God, they're on like the fourth or fifth different cartoon series, and they're still making toys.
And I grew up watching it.
What's that?
Like, it was a show that I grew up watching, and it just further installed superheroes to me.
Absolutely. And now, one of the things that Joe is writing is this great book called Sex. And sex is a component of the story, as it says in the title. But essentially, he has this lead character who is an industrialist and kind of a cross between Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne, who you could easily recognize where the trope is coming from. But he's telling this very interesting original story that no way in hell would DC or Marvel let him do with their characters, because they're still selling bed sheets. Rucka always told me, Greg Rucka, he always wanted to do as a side story or a way to flesh out the Bruce Wayne character, have a bunch of former Bruce Wayne girlfriends all talking about, oh God, one night with Bruce, it was the best sex I ever had. They're all lying, because the reality was he would always make an excuse of not being able to go to bed with them because he had to go out and fight crime. But they all think, because of the image that Bruce Wayne portrays, that they can't be they must be the only one that he never had sex with.
Mm-hmm.
So they're certainly not going to give that up to their, a group of girlfriends and stuff who all had their relationships with Bruce Wayne. So they're all lying. And isn't that hilarious irony? And DC's like, yeah, no, Batman can't do that. Sorry. And it's like, come on, we're writing these for adults. Yeah, we're still selling birthday cakes. We're still selling, puzzles and games and things, toys to kids. No, we really can't explore Batman's sex life. I'm sorry, which has been interesting.
And I know, like, the comics still have issues with letting certain adult themes go through, but I'm so grateful now that they're letting the creators, for the most part, it seems like, really make the characters feel more adult. Like I think about Tom King's Batman run and how it really deals with some really heavy topics overall.
You're right.
But now with Rucka too, with Lois Lane, like there's some hard marital issues that come up in that book.
Yeah,
that you wouldn't have seen 10 years ago, probably.
Well, and you're right about that. And also, the animation has opened up as well. And a lot of people had a problem with the first half hour of the Killing Joke animated movie, and what Azzarello added to the story, and had Barbara Gordon and Batman hook up and everything in a heated moment of passion. And people who grew up on the animated series were really like, "Hey, what are you doing?" Especially given that Kevin Conroy and Tara Strong were the voice actors, the same actors that did it, 20 years ago. I'm shrugging, and again, being a little bit older than that young and teen audience that grew up on the animated series, I had no problem with it. But I can appreciate. I mean, that's the thing; those are the two sides of the argument. We want the stories to be more adult, but by the same token, we still want to believe in Santa Claus. So it's kind of tough.
Yeah, I mean, I personally had my own problems with the Killing Joke adaptation for other reasons, but in the same vein, Kyle Higgins' continuation of the animated universe and Batman Beyond Unlimited, he had that whole sub story with Barbara and Bruce, where like when Dick was gone, they fell into each other's arms in a weird way, and they had to deal with heavy stuff in that.
Yep.
And I thought that was extremely well executed, but like that's the universe I grew up watching as a kid.
Right. And again, those fans that are like, no, she belongs with Dick Grayson. What are you doing? That doesn't, God, Judd Winnick went even further and had Jason Todd revived by Ra's al Ghul's daughter and Talia. And, after he was left for dead, but then he stumbled into a Lazarus pit and found himself again. And at the end of the story, Talia has sex with Jason Todd. And that was a big like, hey, what are you doing? And, again, I shrug. It's like, okay, that's a story choice. You don't have to love it. I had a bigger problem with J. Michael Straczynski saying that Gwen Stacy had an affair with Norman Osborn.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I just don't see that. I mean, that's like, or even a non-sexual thing when Roberto Aguirre Scarza wanted to write a Marvel Knights Fantastic Four story of them going broke. And it's like, I don't think the smartest man in the world goes broke.
Yeah.
I think Reed Richards has inventions and ideas that he could sell to any government or any military in a heartbeat that, they could make a financial mistake and for a moment be broke. But I really do believe that, all right, give me a week. Hey, military, here's something I invented for the FF. You want it for our fighting forces? We sure do. Here's $20 billion. Okay, everything's fine.
Or if you even wanted them just out of the Baxter building, you could just make it that Reed was oblivious to some weird legal thing that kicked them out. Like that. Sure. Like there's other ways around some of that. And
but that's, I don't know if you ever read that story. It was Marvel Knights 4. And they literally are back on Yancey Street, like living in like an apartment. And it's like, I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Again, you've made Reed Richards far too smart to find himself in that situation.
And the thing I find amazing is the stuff like that has been going on for ages within our comic books and TV shows. Because I think about the animated series back in the day, and there's a lot of stuff they allude to that just went over my head as a kid, but it's still there. There's that one episode of Justice League Unlimited with Batman Beyond, and he finds out that Bruce is kind of his father.
Yeah.
And there's a line, I think, by where he asks, like, how'd you get Bruce's DNA? And I think Amanda Waller just goes, he had it lying everywhere. And it's like, oh, okay. As a kid, no idea. As
well,
an adult,
that's funny.
It makes 100% sense now. Or even
I didn't take it to mean that. I took it to mean, well, yeah, Batman's all over the place. He's he's
and I think it was things, as for kids, it was meant that way. But the way the line's delivered is a little like, oh, okay, that's a bit odd.
That is hilarious. That's fantastic. Well, I saw that as an adult man, and my mind didn't go there, but I can appreciate that. It's very funny.
But even the same
founder, she was so perfect as Amanda Waller.
Oh yeah,
she really was.
But I think the same thing in that same series with Wonder Woman and Bruce too, like the romance. And
Yes.
you had my mind's now spacing too. You had Phil Lamar on just recently too, talking about Jon Stewart and Hot Girl.
Yeah, and Hot Girl. Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
stuff that they did with The Question, where he got tortured at the end of those
Yes.
that series, it's just
Or even, my good friend Susan Eisenberg, animated Wonder Woman, and she always talks about playing those great scenes with Kevin Conroy and stuff, and the romance. And no, I mean, again, that's the great thing is you have these brilliant writers like Dwayne McDuffie and Paul Dini and Alan Burnett, who all really grew up on the stuff, loved the stuff so much, and just had this great opportunity with Bruce Timm and the evolution of the DC animated product, starting with the animated series of Batman, and then really Justice League and Batman Beyond. I mean, good Lord, it was fantastic. And one of my best friends who stopped reading comics well before high school, I told him about the Justice League cartoon, and we were watching it, and his wife walked in, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like apologetic. He's like, "You don't understand. I know this is a cartoon, but they really are playing it like adults." He goes, "It really does feel like a live action movie right now, and it's great." And she's like, "All right," and walked away. But he got it. He understood. And that was the great thing, was that show kept on the air. They were pushing it for a Y7 audience.
mm-hmm.
And I know some of the other shows that didn't make it beyond, like the Green Lantern show, didn't make it beyond a season. And I heard a lot of podcasts just complaining and saying, why are they canceling it? And it's like, because the point of that show was to sell a toy line, and the toy line didn't sell. So they got to move on to the next idea. But adults are watching, so the ratings are good. No, because television really is, when we say it's a Y7 show, we want 7-year-olds watching it. And if they're not, then we're failing. Even if we're getting a different adult audience, that was not why this show was created. And we are wasting money on this Y7 network trying to appeal to a Y7 audience with a show that adults are enjoying. And thankfully, because of what's happened, the movies have gotten a little more intense and more hard R's. And the same with the TV shows. God, I've been talking to Pat Schumacher, the showrunner and co-creator of the Harley Quinn animated show. And I don't know if you have DC Universe or even started watching it last week on Sci-Fi Channel.
I have DC Universe, but I haven't got around to watching the Harley show yet.
It's great. It's great. And it's a dirty show. And I mean that in the sense of it absolutely needs to be rated R with a lot of the jokes that they have. And I am stunned. And we've been, because it started on Sci-Fi, Patrick and I have been doing episode recaps going back to the first season. Mm-hmm. And we just recorded a bunch today. And it's like, I won't spoil, but there are certain jokes that it's like, that's definitely an R-rated joke.
Yeah.
I'm like, and the brass, the people upstairs are okay with that? And he's like, no, they get it. This is a Rick and Morty era of animation. They knew that they were buying an adult cartoon. And so they're not winning every argument, but they're winning 9 out of 10 arguments.
Yeah.
Of, we want to do this joke, fine, no problem. And then every now and then something would happen and be like, maybe this one. And the producers are reasonable because they're getting 80 to 90% of what they want in there. And they know that, like someone's footing the bill. And again, it's like, we'd rather Batman not say that or do that. Okay, fine, we get it. That's okay, we'll change it.
And even with like the Teen Titans Go show for the kid audiences, I know a lot of people were hating on it when it first came out. But one, it's actually really funny at times. But just like Animaniacs back in the day, there are jokes they get away with that just go over kids' heads all the time.
Yep.
I think it's in the movie, not the show itself. But there's a point where Robin, they're back in time for some reason, and Robin just sees Bruce there, and he pushes his parents in the alley. You hear 2 gunshots, and he comes back out and thumbs up the rest of the audience, and then runs away. You're like, what's happening?
Yeah, no, it's great. Scotty Young was the guy who told me, because I was like, all right, that show's not for me. That's for kids. He's like, dude, it's Rocky and Bullwinkle subversive. And I knew what he meant because, again, the original Rocky and Bullwinkle had jokes that absolutely were playing over the kids' heads, but they were playing to both sides of the audience, the parents and the kids. And it was a great show. And he's like, I'm telling you, you'll love this show. And I started watching it because I trusted Scotty's sense of humor.
I feel like Disney and Cartoon Network have a real good sense now of how to make a show for 2 audiences. Because I there was one recently, I don't know if you ever watched it, but did you ever watch Gravity Falls on Disney?
No.
It's a huge like throwback horror type show with but it has the kid sensibilities and they don't go too dark with it until like later. But there's a bunch of homages to like old horror or old like kind of like serial stuff. And then they have just jokes in there that are one-time gags. And there's one time where they're looking at a bunch of board games, and one of the board games is called Don't Wake Up Stalin. And it's just a random joke that like only you would get in passing if you're an adult. Or they have an old Columbo show, but it's just about a duck who's Columbo, not like actual Columbo. So it's stuff like that I'm like, okay, cool. Like this is for my age, for older, for everybody.
That's awesome. That's great.
So I don't want to keep you for too much longer, but I just have some quick round questions of
Sure.
just to get to know a bit better, and then we can wrap up. So Q&A session, real
Okay,
fast. Do you remember the first comic you ever owned?
One of them, I do remember the first one I bought with my own money was an issue of Action Comics where Superman had a new identity, and he was Chris Delbart, the Wolf of Wall Street. And there's a fast speed cover shot of Superman flying through a window and then putting a suit on, but he has brown hair, a mustache, and glasses. And it's like, time for my new identity, Chris Delbart, the Wolf of Wall Street. So that's the first one I remember buying with my own money. Before that, I would definitely be handed my older brother and sister and cousins comic books. So, and again, sadly, I can remember, I didn't buy them with my own money, but I do remember the 12-cent era.
Mm-hmm.
I started buying comics when they were 20 cents.
And why did you go into radio? Like what led you there?
Oh man, radio was magic to me. Radio, especially news radio, was the internet of its day because it was 24/7 information. And whether it was 3:00 in the morning, there were live people telling you what was happening in the world at that moment. And also I would dial twist, much as we surf online right now.
Mm-hmm.
And especially at night, pull in stations from other states, or my uncles had shortwave radio. So I listened to, BBC radio, and it was always 6 hours ahead. So it was midnight local time, but it was 6 a.m. London time. And that just fascinated me. And it just opened up the world to me in a way. And I just wanted to be a part of it. So that's, I was working at my high school radio station as a kid, and, really never looked back, and spent 30 years, actually going back to downstate radio, 30 years in Chicago radio, and 35 years in professional radio, starting in Central Illinois back in 1985.
And next question is, what's currently your favorite film?
The ones from last year, I would say Ford versus Ferrari was my favorite film of last year. I just thought it was great. I was always a big fan. It's interesting. I was as a kid a big fan of watching things like Daytona and the Indianapolis 500 and all that stuff. But I really loved the old movies like Grand Prix
Mm-hmm.
and Le Mans and films like that. And and it's a real story. It's a true story, Ford versus Ferrari. And I think it is such an interesting story. And I think they shot it beautifully, and they really captured it. And I've watched documentaries about the real story along with the film itself. So that was far and away my favorite film. And I would say second, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. People have a problem with Quentin Tarantino's weird endings and little rewrites of history and things like that. It doesn't bother me. That's just his style, and that's just his way of reminding us all, this is a movie, this is a fantasy, and if I were in control of the universe, which I am as the filmmaker, I would have liked to seen it happen this way. And that's why I love Inglourious Bastards, and that's why I love Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Yeah,
there's a real quick tangent. I've been binging video essays on horror movies, but this guy covered Once Upon a Time though during that binge, and he talked about how, in a lot of ways, it was Quentin's way of showing what would happen if that tragedy didn't take place, and if that tragedy didn't take place, the golden age of Hollywood would have continued for a lot longer.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right.
And since that tragedy brought horror to the golden age of Hollywood that it was trying to ignore all that time, it changed the landscape of what films were being made after that.
That is true. And he is very cognizant of that. I've heard Tarantino say that the film Rocky ended that cynical 70s period of movie making that really produced incredible films, cop films like Serpico and French Connection and things like that, to really edgy stuff like, Boys in the Band, exploring homosexuality and just a lot of gritty things. But Rocky had this great happy ending, and all of a sudden the audience responded, and the studios are like, oh, we forgot that we should do enough with real life. Let's have some happy endings happen. People need that. And that really did kind of change movie making back in 1975, 76, when the first Rocky movie came out. So, no, Tarantino really does, beyond the obvious and loving films as much as he does, he understands why they clicked with audiences and why they were important.
And one last question. What's one guest that you still want to have on Word Balloon that you haven't been able to snag yet?
With Stan Lee for a long time, and sadly he passed away.
Yeah.
Jim Steranko was a long-time hope, and I luckily got him last year.
And that was even though it was like live, that was a great episode.
Oh, great! Honestly, man, I love Jim. Jim was a magician before he was a comic book writer, and I think is still a showman and likes to tell his stories his way. And you just get out of the way and you let him tell it. And I've heard that story a million times. If that's the only time I ever speak to Jim Steranko, I can rest easy. I'd like to get Grant on a solo conversation, Grant Morrison still. I think that would be great. I would love to talk to Alan Moore. I don't know if he'd be willing to talk to me. And I get why Alan Moore is frustrated with the superhero world. And I don't think it's with the readers. I think it is with the two publishers. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've heard me make this analogy, but I'll do it on your show. It's like with Watchmen and what happened with him with DC, and even compounded worse in the 90s and early 2000s with Wildstorm and America's Best Comics and what he was doing there. It's like he built the home of his dreams with his stories at DC. And think of it like being a guy that finally is making enough money that he can build a house, his dream house. And he's got his dream backyard, and he's got a pool, and he's got an incredible bar and barbecue. And it's everything he always wanted. And then he has a divorce with his wife, and that's who, DC represents. And every time he sees people that say how much they love him, they want to talk about the house. And it's like, then Watchmen is the house, basically. And it's like, yeah, listen, man, I love what you're doing right now. But how about that dream house, man? Wasn't that amazing? I mean, the pool and the barbecue and the bar. And it's just like, I've been doing things for 30 years since then, 35 years. Can we talk about something else? And I can appreciate his frustration with that. So I love Alan Moore, and I really respect him as a storyteller. And he's been really, it's interesting because his focus has been very much on where he grew up in the history of Northern England and everything, where he grew up. And he continues to write incredible stories. Mm-hmm. So whatever he writes, I'm always happy to read it. So yeah, I would probably say Alan Moore and Grant Morrison of the two that I haven't had a chance to talk to. And I've been very fortunate. 15 years. Today actually is the 15th anniversary.
Oh wow!
Yeah, May 10th. Absolutely. So I'm very lucky, and I think getting in as early as I did and having my radio experience afforded me the opportunity to do interviews my way and maybe do them a little bit more experienced than some of my peers in podcasting.
Yeah, and honestly, John, like, again, if it wasn't for you, and I really don't think I would be doing this right now. But not only that, like the insights I have on the comic industry and the writing insights I get from the writers you get on, but even the artist insights, like that's so important. And I wouldn't have half of it if it wasn't just for listening to your show.
Oh, thanks, man. Again, I mean, it's having been a reader literally since I was able to read. So, I mean, I'm 55, so really it's been like probably 50 years of reading comics, or pretty close to it. And then also just what's happening in media, and specifically in comics. It's a very, very interesting time. And it started about 22 years ago with the first Blade movie coming out from Marvel. But ever since then, it's fun to talk to even the more experienced guys, like when I talk to Walter Simonson and say, did you ever think a 24/7 news cycle would be here for comic books? What is that like now? I mean, because, again, Walt was a guy breaking into comics in the early 70s, or Neil Adams, another guy like that, or Denny O'Neil, that are older and stuff. I mean, it really is interesting. And I like asking those questions as much as what's Batman going to do next? Or, some of the obvious of who would win a fist fight, Hulk or Superman. It's like, Okay. I mean, I'm entertained with those stories as well, and especially when they do those kind of crossover stories. But I again, it's what's behind the inspiration. What interests them and makes them want to create the stories that they create. That's what I really look for in word balloon interviews.
Yeah, and like as you said, like with the 24-hour news cycle just for comics, I've been thinking about recently. Someone created a CBR headline generator,
Okay.
and one of them that posts, I think Mitch shared it on Twitter. It was the new Deadly Wasp and what and their weird connection to Joe Quesada, and I'm like, oh yeah, that might be a headline one of these days. That might actually be a headline. Um,
It could.
so again, thank you, John, for being on the show. I'll give you the space now to just plug Word Balloon in every aspect that it has.
Oh, thanks, man. It's Word Balloon. I've got, wordballoon.com. That's the website. I'm a couple days behind, but I will be spending today updating what I've put out there. I'm on the Spreaker podcast network. They're very kind. They host my bandwidth. And if you go to wordballoon.com, you can find shows there. I'm at every podcast platform there is, iTunes, all the Android platforms as well, all the Apple platforms. I'm on Spotify. I'm not on iHeartRadio because they were a competitor to CBS Radio, where I've been working for the last couple of years,
Oh,
and I didn't want to put my show there. I might now. I'm not sure. I
yeah.
haven't made my mind up. But yeah, anywhere where you can find podcasts, you should be able to find Word Balloon. And like I now have a YouTube channel. I've only been doing video for about the last 5 or 6 weeks. And the numbers are low, but that's okay. I mean, they're growing, and
Mm-hmm.
I would say with your show too, Jesse, just be patient,
Mm-hmm.
because I got my listeners one listener at a time. And I mean, it's have faith in what you're doing. You really, I've appreciated this conversation. You're conducting a conversation the way I would have done it, and left yourself open to talk about topics beyond your list of questions and everything, because that really, it's listening.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it becomes a conversation rather than an interview.
And that's what this show is just about, is just like the conversation that comes with the territory. I feel like there's
Sounds
so
like it, man. Yeah.
there's so much that I feel like most interview shows kind of leave on the wayside. But I don't know, comics. I'm 26 at this point, but I think my parents say my third word was Batman. They took me to see Batman Forever when I was not even one, and so like
Okay.
it's been a part of my life for forever.
That's
So
awesome, man. That's
uh,
fantastic. No, and again, you get it. I mean, this is there's, like I said, there. I also think it's good that you're doing it by yourself,
mhm.
because I think when you have co-hosts, this is my example always. If you got 3 hosts and one guest, and the first host asks and says, "How'd you break into comics?" and the guest will say, "Well, it was about a year or so after I got out of jail for committing manslaughter, and I spent 10 years in jail, and I decided I wanted to do something creative." And then the second interview will say, "What's your favorite color?" And it's like, no. I don't want to hear about his favorite color. Tell me about the manslaughter. What? I think we're leaving something on the table there. And I think when it's just one-on-one, you're able to be receptive. But when you have, and I find this too, when you have 2 guests, and a lot of times the publisher will be like, "Hey, great," like for instance, CC with the Best Intentions was like, "We're gonna have you on with Liam and Grant," and I'm like, "Oh, I really want to talk to them separately, because I don't want to short shrift one over the other." And Liam is a really smart guy, and he writes novels as well as writes his own comics,
Mhm.
and I didn't want to short shrift him, and I knew going in how to handle it. But again, it's like, I could spend those 20 minutes of this 40-minute interview with Liam with Grant and ask a million more questions, and I'd say the same thing about Liam. So it's hard, and that's why I think one-on-one is always best in terms of having this kind of conversation.
Yeah. And everybody's listening, like, again, check out John's Patreon. Like, support him if you like these kind of shows, because John puts out a bit more than I do for sure. But also, like, he has a whole 15-year back catalog now.
That's true.
All these shows to listen to. And if you just support him for even $1, it means a lot.
It absolutely does. No, thanks, Jesse, for reminding me of my Patreon page.
Yeah.
Patreon.com/wordballoon, all one word. Yeah, that's great. And my YouTube channel is also Word Balloon, one word. But no, thank you. And thank you, everybody that is listening, that is aware of the show, and even listening helps support the show. And just, if you like what you hear, let a friend know. I mean, and it's really, word of mouth is still the best publicity I can get. And 15 years later, I'm still getting new listeners that are just discovering Word Balloon and enjoying the archive. So thank you.
Yeah. And again, thanks, John, for being on.
Jesse, my pleasure. Great conversation, man. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, no, not a problem. It was a pleasure for me too. Hey everybody, it's Jesse again, coming back in at the end to plug some of the podcast social media links and give some credits for what you hear on the podcast and see on your feed. You can find us on Twitter at Comic Books Pod. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/comicbooksmatter. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com at /comicbooksmatter. Only $1 tier right now, and it just gives me your support, but soon we'll have some new content on there for you. You can reach me by email at comicbooksmatter@gmail.com if you have any questions for guests, if you have any stories about comics that impacted you, or if you want to be a guest on the show. Logo by my friend Steven. He's great, has nothing to promote, but if you see Steven, tell him he's great, and thanks for the logo. The theme is Joy in the Restaurant by David Szesztay, and I found it on freemusicarchive.org. Thanks, everybody, and I hope you have a good rest of your weekend.